George Washington and Slavery by Caroline Millett. George's early life. He lived in the South. George was around slavery his entire life and became a slave owner at age 11 when his father died. His life also depended on the labor of slaves when he was younger. Later in life, his Mount Vernon estate had over 300 slaves in both house and fields. He expected his slaves to work at least 6 days a week all day. After his marriage to Martha, his slaveholding increased dramatically and came to own even more slaves over time. George also dealt with his slaves far more humanely than other Virginians because he had grown up seeing the harsh treatments of slaves and knew it was wrong. Slaves were granted holidays and Sundays off. Evenings were for taking care of their families or visiting one another. The rest of the day they worked. Slave children, however, were not allowed to play with the white children during their free time. There is also a darker side of George that has to do with his teeth. Some say that George's teeth weren't wooden at all. They were in fact made out of ivory, cow, and human teeth. George Washington actually bought those teeth from slaves. Yes, it's a grisly fact about Washington, but it gives us a new point of view on slavery that we never thought about before. George Washington also had escaped slaves. One of his most famous escaped slaves was Anna Judge, who was going to be sold to Martha's granddaughter, which would mean being separated from her friends and family. She ran away and Washington was furious. George sent out slave catchers to kidnap her, but she soon learned of this plot. She tried negotiating with George, but it didn't work. He didn't like the thought of negotiating with a slave because he thought that black people were inferior. They never found Anna Judge. George, slavery, and presidency. George Washington wanted to be remembered as a good president, and he knew that being a slaveholder is on the wrong side. So on his will, he declared that once Martha was dead, he would set all his slaves free and provide them with education. Martha thought that this would give the slaves an interest in her death, so she set them free early. The ironic connection between his presidency and slavery was that he desired freedom for all his people, yet he was there kidnapping people trying to escape slavery. Changing point of view. His first encounter with a different point of view was when he witnessed black soldiers fighting bravely during the war in the Continental Army. Also during the war, he listened to people's opinions on slavery, most of which opposed it. This was how George Washington came to realize that slavery was wrong.